Before this video begins, I would like to take a quick moment to thank Bain Books for helping set up the interview that is in this video, and I would also like to apologize for the audio quality. When I was working in editing this video, I ran into some problems and I was not able to get the best audio quality. So you can still hear the interview, but it's just, you might have to turn up your volume a lot. I apologize for that. This was in no way the fault of the author or the publisher that helped set this up. This was my problem in editing, but I still hope that you enjoy the video.
Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I am delighted to be joined by Joelle Presby, who is an author of books such as the Dabare Snake Launcher from Bain Books. Thank you so much for being on the channel.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun.
So, some of my longtime viewers might recognize you because you also did the interview talking about the Worlds of Honor
Yes.
book that you had a novella.
Yeah. What Price Victory
What Price
with
Victory,
David Weber.
Yeah, so we did have that. We talked a little bit, but today we're going to be talking all about your novels.
Thank you.
Specifically, Dabare Snake Launcher. This is a book that came out in November 2022 in trade paperback and in ebook, and it also is coming out in mass market this November.
Yes. Depending on where you get your books, you might be able to get it the last week of October. But yeah.
Okay.
Officially, it comes out in November.
November. Okay. So it comes out in November, and I was delighted to be able to read this. I really enjoyed it. I think
Thank you. Love to hear that.
Hard sci-fi is not always my jam, but sometimes it works, and this one was an example of that work. So my questions will mostly be about that, and then I have a few others about a few other things you worked on. So, what was the process of writing the Dabare Snake Launcher? Did you know the story ahead of time? Did you plan it all out, or did you kind of find it along the way?
I knew most of the science ahead of time, and then as I dug into it to figure out what characters belong in this hard science fiction novel, and talked to more people with specialized engineering areas for the parts that I didn't know myself, and finding out what their thoughts were, inspired to develop the story a little bit backwards from how I've written other things, where other times it started with characters or started with the big conflict and then went from there.
Yeah, that's interesting, because usually it is you have the story and you have to work the science around the story, or work the details, whereas this, you knew the science. Because for the people who don't know, this story is about the building of basically a space elevator in Africa. What would the process, the engineering behind that?
And people who are, you may have heard space elevator before. It was a popular idea, very popular in the 70s. There were several novels about it, and it was in popular science kind of magazines talking about how we're going to have one of these soon. But there were major engineering problems, which is why we don't have one yet. And in recent years, there were developments that made it potentially possible to actually build one, so that we really only needed one more change to what we know about how to do engineering to make it really, like, we could start building it tomorrow if we get this one change. And traditionally in hard science fiction, you get one fake thing, one really application of magic to your science, where somebody in a lab somewhere figured out how to do one thing, and that's the only change you get. So as soon as I learned that there was just one change necessary to do this, I pitched the idea of writing a space elevator novel to Toni Weisskopf, and she said, well, you know, you've got an engineering background and your husband works at NASA. I wouldn't say yes to other people, but you are what do this. Oh. It's like, okay, yes, I love that.
It helped that you already knew the people at Bain through your works with David Weber.
Right. Toni Weisskopf had told me to pitch her some ideas, and I actually pitched 5 to her because I wanted her to say yes to something, give her some options, right. and she said yes to 2 of my 5 ideas. And so I got a 2-book contract out of my 5 ideas.
So in this book, it is basically a kind of alternate history sci-fi, where it's set in Africa. But the kind of twist, the alternate history, is that Africa is instead one of the financial powerhouses. There's a lot more wealth and opportunities there, and people are wanting to go there.
In my opinion, it is not alternate history. It's just future history.
Future history.
It's just the future, because in alternate history you pick something that's changed in the past.
Right.
And I get that a lot of people read this story and they think that this is not a likely future. But all the stuff that's in there, except for my diamond wire that makes the space elevator possible, is real. That oil that is the wealth for Cameroon in the novel, that oil is there now, and it's not being pumped out. So as we use up other oil, it's still there. And so in 100 or 200 years, as long as the world economy still depends on oil, we got to get it somewhere.
That makes sense. And I mean, I think it would help their economy drastically. But it is that kind of interesting twist. So some, not many science fiction books are set in Africa. So I thought that made it, kind of a bold choice. Was it always going to be in Africa, or did you have to change that in the writing process?
That was part of my pitch, that I'm a newer writer, and I wanted to pick some things that built on things I already knew. Anytime you write something, you're going to have to do a lot of research if you want to try to make it accurate. But I wanted to pick things that I already had personal experience, and having grown up in Cameroon in West Africa, and having still contacts of people there, because I left in 1992, which has been a minute, and so some of Google Maps zooming in is the thing that I remember still there or not, because if it's gone by now, it's definitely gone in 150 years.
Right.
But yeah.
On that, it is a bold choice that most of the characters in the book are Africans, specifically Black Africans. So was there any fear of handling anything improperly, or were you just, when you lived there, so ingrained in the culture that it just came second nature to you?
I'd like to say it was second nature, but as I was getting close to publication, I did start getting worried of, what if people feel that I've made the characters that have some villainous aspects too villainous? What if people feel stereotyped? And I was greatly reassured when I sent it to some Nigerian science fiction writers and got their opinions that they were totally fine with it. It was like, all right, I did all right.
Yeah, so that's good, because there's the two halves of, you don't want to just do things safe, so you want to take risks, but you also don't want to do something that's maybe going to tick people off.
Well, I wasn't so concerned about ticking people off as I'm aware that there is not a lot of fiction available in the United States that references Cameroon, and I didn't want people to look at my characters as their only experience of this and think that this is all that people from maybe all of West Africa are like. When hopefully there will be more stories and people will see a wide variety, and there will not be that pressure to represent.
And there is kind of a diversity of character traits, of personalities. So you don't just paint them all as a single thing. So that does work out well, I think.
Having more than one character that has those attributes helps.
So this book came out from the publisher Baen Books, which you've obviously worked with quite a bit.
Yes.
You worked on several short story collections with authors like David Weber in the past, and then you've also co-written The Road to Hell novel.
Yes.
What's the process like with Baen? Do you have more a close connection with the editors, or is your agent more involved?
I'm one of those authors who has chosen not to have an agent. I have a lawyer instead.
Okay.
Just a different way of doing it.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And so when David is my editor, it's, I give the story to him, and he tells me what he wants changed, and I change it, and once it's at the level that he wants, then he hands it on to Baen.
Gotcha.
When it's with my solo novel, it was my first time having the direct connection back and forth with Baen, of getting editorial recommendations from Tony Weisskopf instead of from a fellow writer who is also an editor.
Right.
And that was kind of amazing.
So when you were working on this book, did you have a lot of input in things like the formatting or the cover design or the back cover? Do you have any input, or is it just you just let them deal with it and you're just happy at the end?
I called all my friends and asked if they'd like to read my draft book and see if they had anything nice to say put on the back. They had me give them a draft blurb to go on the back, and I am very pleased that they completely ignored my draft blurb and used a professional marketing one instead, because apparently I'm used to writing like novels or short stories that are like 10,000 words, and that's not 200 words.
Right. That was one of the authors I follow. He's usually writing hundreds of thousands of words in his books, and he was trying to write a short story, and he was told to write a 200-word short story, and he wrote a 2,000-word short story, and they said, still, that's the shortest thing you've ever written. So.
Yeah. And for the cover artist Kurt Miller was wonderful, asking about ideas I might have. And so I gave him several and went some back and forth with him, telling me what things you need to have on a science fiction cover, and actually gave him a little video file of the spacecraft that's on the cover there, and so he could use something that was pretty accurate, we think, of what it would actually look like.
Yeah, it's a great cover. I showed it to one of my fellow teachers at my school, and she thought, oh, it's a great cover. And I said, okay, do you see the snake? And she said, no. And I said, look again. And she's like, that's brilliant. So it has that double, that you see it, and then you're like, oh. Yeah,
he was describing how he was thinking of the volcano and the spacecraft, and I knew about the scene about the snake, and I said, well, this is probably too hard, but you know, I've got this scene where there's this snake that's sort of phantasmically there, but not there. He's like, I got it, I can do that, that's perfect. It's like, well, okay, yes, sir.
When you were writing the book, it's mostly hard sci-fi, as we were talking about, with that one aspect being the fiber design, which you said, I think you said in another interview, they're getting close.
Well, close in that maybe we can make a 0.5 meter long carbon nanofiber chain, but that is not surface of the Earth to geosynchronous orbit.
Right.
That we have, as far as I am aware in the available scientific press, we have no way of connecting one piece of fiber to another piece and having it be with no join issues. If we could do that, then we could make whatever length.
Yeah. So that's what makes it interesting, is that you really know the science behind it, but there's also a little bit of spiritual stuff in the book. There's some of the stuff behind the snake mythology and the snake spirituality that certain characters have is interesting, because most hard sci-fi would steer away from that. Was that because it's so culturally important to Cameroon, or was it just that's something you find fascinating that you wanted to include?
Definitely both of those things. Often in science fiction, when it's Western nation focused, there will be characters who have religious beliefs and who have foibles that are somewhat mystical. You know, you want to wear your lucky shoes when you're going to launch the rockets or whatever. And in Cameroon, it's a little different, but also, having lived in Cameroon, there are a lot of diseases where you get really high fevers. And if you've ever had a high fever, you see things sometimes, and that is a medical fact, that when your brain is getting cooked, you're not experiencing everything the way it would be if your brain was not getting cooked. And so, to me, that's a scientific thing, that sometimes you're going to see things.
Okay.
And your back brain tries to make sense of things, and so if you have mythology, it kind of all gets translated in the soup somehow into something that can kind of make sense to you.
So you have the characters of the Sadao family in there, and which, first of all, it took me a while to second. Wait, they both have the same first name, but not the same last name. And I was like, flip it. That's why they're all Sadaos. That'd be really confusing otherwise. But you have the Sadao family that is kind of having like this kind of jockeying for power among the family. Was that something that you experienced or that you saw when you were in Cameroon, or did you take that from somewhere else?
I took that from elsewhere. When I was in Cameroon, for the most part, I pretty much lived in the sticks, in the backcountry area that sort of the border between the Sahara and regular grasslands where you could have a sustainable farm to produce a lot. And the people who would be like the Sado family would be sort of a new rich family, would be, for the most part, living in the major metropolises in Douala or Yaoundé or maybe in Gambare. And that's not where I lived.
Okay. And then the character of Chummy.
Yes.
How did he come about in the creative process?
When my family moved back to the United States when I was 12, 13, I started to learn how U.S. culture sometimes viewed people from not the U.S. and how there was a thing in movies of a magic black person, and that some people felt that you should never have that kind of character. And having come from Cameroon, I immediately thought that, well, actually, if there was a Cameroonian who was in the business world and somebody got the idea that they were magic, they would run with that and ask for a salary increase. And that's who Chummy is.
Yes, he's very manipulative. He will use whatever is necessary to get that advancement for himself.
But he also has a sort of internal kindness that he will teach other people to build on their strengths and get as much value for themselves as they can, and put together these great teams and sort of do the Dumbo magic feather thing of telling people they can do it and then convincing them through placebo effect and having them really be successful, and then look back, everybody Chummy talks to and tells them to do that they can do these things, they can, so it'll work for me too, and it just dominoes, and maybe he is magic in that way.
So I want to transition to a different topic real quick. You have written short stories. We talk about the ones that you did with David Weber, but you also did one in, I can't believe I'm going to say this title, in the book Chicks in Tank Tops. I can't believe I just said that.
I love it so much.
First of all, this is just a hilarious cover. I think this pops really well, because when I've seen this online, it gets your attention, which is good. But what was your process of working on this short story? And you had the short story, I think it was Barbie and Ken.
Yes, Sergeant Barbie and Gator Ken versus the Hurricane.
Can you tell us what that was like and what that short story is?
Well, I also need to tell you why this anthology is like a personal milestone for me, that I got to be part of this. This is not the first Chicks anthology. There have been several before, and I grew up reading them. Esther Friesner was the editor who made them happen for the early ones, and she's got a story in this one.
This was that was the Chicks in Chainmail was her original.
Yes. And before I went to the U.S. Naval Academy, I just read through all the Chicks books, and they're all funny, and they have some relationship to women in the military, and here I was, a person who had come from Cameroon and not realized that women were allowed to be in the military in the United States until I got back here and started learning how our culture is a little different than their culture. And I went to the United States Naval Academy, and there were some things that were just a little weird, and some of the same conflicts that I had read in the Chicks in Chainmail stories were coming up, and because of having enjoyed that humorous take on it, it just made everything smoother in my own life of, yeah, you know, this is wrong, but it's also hilarious.
So, what was this specific story that you wrote?
Okay, so I lived in Norfolk, Virginia, some of the time when I was in the Navy, and it's a place that is sinking relative to sea level, and hurricanes and then are getting worse and worse. And so I wrote a story about tanks being part of a disaster response team for a hurricane, and I made my tank be adjusted by Sergeant Barbie to be able to be a submarine, and I got to tell my Naval Academy graduate buddies that I convinced an editor to let me make a tank into a submarine, and I got the Navy story in the Army book.
That's clever. That's certain. That's certainly
And
clever.
I also turned it in really early because I was afraid that
They would say
Jason Cordova would say, "No, Joelle. I know you're trying to be funny, but that was too funny." When I'm like, you have passed funny, not allowed.
You're doing absurdist storytelling in the Chicks in Chainmail series anyway, so why don't you own it? Of course we're absurd. That's so. That is. I now I really want to read that story.
And it is technically also part of the Dabare universe. My story is.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
the Sergeant Barbie is a relative of the nursing aide in the first chapter of Dabare Snake Launcher.
Okay.
And I adjusted forward for the time period of how deep we think Norfolk Peninsula is going to have sunk in 150 years. And that's why it looks like Venice, and roads that actually exist now are canals in the story.
Really? Oh, that's really interesting. Now, did you have much connection with the other authors who were writing their short stories, or was it just you got to write yours and then they let you know if you were good or not?
Yeah, it was a do your own thing, and Jason was processing to make sure people didn't write the same kind of tank stories. And okay, give me your initial short pitch, and you have to have another one if it is too close. But you know, no one else wanted to make their tank into a submarine, so I didn't have to change that.
You were safe. What's the process of changing, like when you go down to sit down to write the story of something where it's an original novel that's yours in your universe versus something where you are co-writing and it is in someone else's universe? How do you switch that, or is there a switch in your brain when you do that kind of writing?
On one hand, it's easier to do my own thing because I'm free to change my mind and have as much as I want that's wild and crazy. It doesn't have to match in tone previously published things or any of that. But in other ways, it slows me down because I have to make all my own decisions. I can't just look up what have we said about this already, because, well, I've got what I've said, but I can make it different.
Okay. Do you have any upcoming short stories, collections, or novels that you can talk to us about a little bit?
I have several that I cannot talk to you about.
Okay.
I don't have any that I can talk to you about, sorry.
Well, that's hopeful. That's
Yes.
hopeful we'll have
Yes.
more. I can just say for me, I really hope we get more Dabare stories because it was very unique.
I can tell you I'm under contract for another Dabare, and I'm under contract for more multiverse novels, and I look forward to giving all of those to you.
So thank you so much for doing this interview. You can find the Dabare Snake Launcher at bookstores and online. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.